The helicopter footage went viral within hours. A tiny figure with long blonde hair, no more than 6 years old, running alongside 6 massive wolves through the Montana wilderness. The video, shaky and brief, captured something that shouldn't exist: a child moving in perfect harmony with predators, leading them through deep snow like she belonged there. Breaking: feral child found living with wolf pack, screamed across every news channel. Social media exploded. 50 million views in 12 hours. Comments ranged from disbelief to outrage to wonder. But the grainy footage only showed a fraction of the truth. What the cameras couldn't capture was the gentle way the largest wolf nudged the girl when she stumbled, or how she shared her meager meal with the pack, or the ancient Apache lullaby she hummed as they settled for sleep. When the full story finally emerged, it would break hearts across America and change everything people thought they knew about family, love, and survival. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Thomas Whitehorse stood at his kitchen window watching the steam rise from his coffee mug as the first light of dawn painted the Montana mountains gold. At 68, his weathered hands still trembled slightly, not from age, but from memories that 20 years couldn't erase. The Purple Heart on his mantle gathered dust, but the nightmares from Vietnam remained fresh. Losing his son Michael in Afghanistan 15 years ago had reopened wounds he thought had healed. When his wife Ruth died of cancer 5 years back, the silence in their cabin became deafening. The 40 acres surrounding his home bordered Glacier National Park, a wilderness so vast and untamed that wolves still roamed free. Most locals feared them. Thomas understood them: predators, survivors, creatures who had lost everything yet somehow endured. He saw himself in their amber eyes. A gentle knock interrupted his brooding. Sarah Morningstar stepped through the door without waiting, a privilege earned through 5 years of shared coffee and comfortable silences. At 65, she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had spent 4 decades teaching children. Her graying hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her kind eyes held the wisdom of a woman who had loved thousands of students but never had children of her own. "Did you see the news?" Sarah's voice carried an edge Thomas rarely heard. She set her iPad on his kitchen table, the screen showing that viral helicopter footage. This happened less than 50 miles from here. Thomas studied the grainy video, his trained eye catching details others missed. "That's Little Thunder territory," he murmured, referring to the mountain peak visible in the background. "Haven't seen wolf activity there in months." Sarah swiped to the comments section, thousands of opinions flooding past. They're calling her feral, dangerous. They want to capture her, put her in some institution. Her voice cracked slightly. "She can't be more than 6 years old, Thomas." The girl in the video moved with purpose, not fear. She wasn't running from the wolves, she was running with them, leading them even. Something about her posture, the way she tilted her head, sparked recognition in Sarah's mind. Years of working with traumatized Native American children had taught her to read body language across cultural barriers. "There's something else," Sarah whispered, zooming in on a frame where the girl's face was partially visible. "Those hand signals she's making to the wolves. I've seen them before, in my Cherokee language classes. They're not random gestures." Thomas set down his mug, his military instincts sharpening. Outside, his trail cameras had been picking up unusual activity for weeks. Massive paw prints mixed with something smaller, more human. He'd dismissed them as imagination, but now... "What are you thinking, Sarah?" She looked up from the screen, determination replacing uncertainty. "I'm thinking that little girl didn't just survive in those mountains by accident. Someone, or something, has been taking care of her." The morning routine that had sustained Thomas Whitehorse for 5 years shattered at 5:30 a.m. His trail cameras, checked religiously every dawn, told an impossible story. Massive paw prints, larger than any wolf tracks he'd seen in 20 years of forest ranging, crisscrossed the game trail behind his cabin. But it was the smaller prints beside them that made his blood run cold. Human, child-sized, barefoot in snow that would kill an adult in hours. Thomas's coffee mug crashed to the kitchen floor, ceramic fragments scattering like his composure. The viral video wasn't happening 50 miles away. It was happening in his backyard. He pulled on his heaviest coat and boots, muscle memory from decades of wilderness experience taking over. The November air bit through his layers as he followed the trail, each step confirming what his mind refused to accept. The tracks told a story of cooperation, wolf and child moving together, not predator stalking prey. 20 minutes later, Sarah's Honda Civic crunched up his gravel driveway. She emerged clutching her iPad and a thermos of coffee, her cheeks flushed from cold and excitement. "Thomas, you have to see this," she called, rushing toward his front porch. "The video has 52 million views now. CNN is sending a crew, but there's something else. She's here." Thomas's voice cut through the morning air like an axe through wood. Sarah stopped mid-sentence, her breath forming silver clouds. "What?" "The girl from the video. She's been living on my land." He pointed toward the tree line where his tracks disappeared into thick undergrowth. "Maybe for weeks." Sarah's hands shook as she set down her thermos. Her 40 years of teaching had prepared her for many things, but not this. "Are you certain?" "I've been tracking game for longer than you've been teaching children, Sarah." "These aren't deer prints." Thomas's military bearing returned, shoulders squared, voice steady despite the impossibility of the situation. "Whatever happened to that little girl, it's happening right here." They followed the trail together, Thomas leading with the careful steps of a man who had once navigated Vietnamese jungles, Sarah close behind with the determined stride of someone who had never backed down from helping a child in need. The tracks led deeper into the woods, past Thomas's property line and into the national forest, where civilization gave way to wilderness. The howling started as they climbed the ridge. Not the lonely wail of a single wolf, but a complex harmony that raised the hair on Thomas's neck. He had heard similar sounds in the mountains of Southeast Asia, where tigers still ruled and men learned to fear the dark. This was different, organized, almost musical. "My God," Sarah whispered, pointing through a gap in the pine trees. Below them, in a natural clearing carved by an ancient stream, 6 wolves formed a loose circle around a figure so small she seemed like a doll among giants. The child from the video sat cross-legged in the snow, apparently unaware of the cold that should have killed her hours ago. Her blonde hair hung in tangled braids, and her clothes, what remained of them, were a patchwork of animal hide and torn fabric. She was singing. The melody drifted up to them on the mountain wind, words in a language Sarah recognized but hadn't heard in years, Apache. The traditional lullaby her Cherokee grandmother used to sing, close enough in linguistic roots that Sarah could understand fragments. Words about protection, about family, about never being alone. The largest wolf, a massive female with silver-streaked fur, lifted her head and howled in harmony with the child's song. One by one, the others joined, creating a sound that belonged to the world before cities, before roads, before the boundaries that separated human from wild. Thomas felt tears freezing on his cheeks. In 25 years of military and civilian service, he had never witnessed anything so beautiful or so heartbreaking. This wasn't a feral child living with animals. This was a family. "We have to help her," Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Help her?" Thomas turned to study his friend's face. "Sarah, look at her. Does she look like she needs help?" The child had stopped singing and was now sharing what appeared to be raw fish with the wolves, tearing pieces with her small hands and distributing them with the careful attention of someone who understood pack hierarchy. She moved without fear, her gestures confident and purposeful. When the smallest wolf, a young male with a slight limp, received his portion, she gently examined his injured leg with the tenderness of a mother caring for her child. She's organizing them, Thomas realized aloud. Teaching them, leading them. Sarah pulled out her iPad, fingers fumbling with cold and excitement as she began recording. The world needs to see this, not the sensationalized helicopter footage, but this, the truth. A twig snapped beneath Thomas's boot. In the clearing below, 6 wolf heads turned toward them in perfect unison, amber eyes locking onto the humans above. The child looked up as well, her bright blue eyes meeting Thomas's across the distance. For a moment that stretched like eternity, 2 worlds regarded each other. The old soldier and the retired teacher, products of civilization and structure, stared down at the child who had found family in the wilderness. She showed no fear, only curiosity, tilting her head like the wolves around her. Then she raised her right hand and made a gesture that caused Sarah to gasp. The traditional Apache sign for friend or peace, a symbol Sarah had learned in her cultural sensitivity training, but never expected to see in the wild Montana mountains. "She knows we're here," Sarah breathed. "She's trying to communicate." The moment shattered as distant voices echoed through the forest. "Search Team Alpha, sweep the northern quadrant. Command wants this situation resolved before the media circus gets worse." Sheriff's deputies. Moving fast and loud through the woods, their radio chatter destroying the sacred silence of the clearing. In seconds, the wolves scattered, melting into the trees with the fluid grace of creatures born to disappear. The child hesitated for one heartbeat, her eyes still locked on Thomas and Sarah before following her pack into the shadows. "We have to get down there," Sarah said, already moving. Before they what?" Thomas caught her arm. "Capture her. Separate her from the only family she's known. Put her in some sterile facility where doctors can study the feral child like a laboratory specimen." Sarah's face crumpled with the weight of impossible choices. Her every instinct screamed to protect the child, but protect her from what? The wilderness that had kept her alive, or the civilization that would try to save her from it? The radio voices grew closer, accompanied by the heavy breathing and branch-breaking passage of men moving too quickly through unfamiliar terrain. Thomas made a decision that would haunt and define the rest of his life. "Come on," he said, taking Sarah's hand. "Let's go introduce ourselves properly, before someone else makes that choice for her." They descended toward the clearing where the impossible had become real, where a little girl had found love in the last place anyone would think to look, where family meant something older and truer than blood or law or the boundaries that humans drew between themselves and the world they thought they had conquered. Behind them, the radio chatter grew louder, and time began running out. The clearing felt sacred as Thomas and Sarah descended, their boots crunching through snow that sparkled like diamonds in the morning light. The child was gone, vanished with her wolf family into the dense pine forest. But her presence lingered in the circular depression where she had sat, in the scattered fish bones that told of shared meals, in the lingering scent of wood smoke, and something wilder, something that spoke of nights spent under stars instead of ceilings. Thomas knelt where the child had been sitting, his weathered fingers touching the packed snow. "She'll come back," he said with the certainty of a man who had tracked both animals and enemies through hostile territory. "This is her place, her home." Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, not against the cold, but against the enormity of what they had witnessed. "Thomas, we can't let them take her. You saw how she moved, how she communicated with those wolves. She's not some feral creature. She's adapted." She's surviving. She's thriving. The radio chatter grew closer, harsh voices cutting through the mountain silence like chainsaws through cathedral quiet. Got fresh tracks here, Sergeant. Multiple wolves, definitely heading north toward the ridge. How long do you think she's been out here? Sarah asked, studying the makeshift shelter tucked beneath an overhang of rock. Branches had been woven together with strips of hide to create windbreaks, and a fire ring built from carefully selected stones showed signs of recent use. Months, maybe longer. Thomas examined the construction with professional interest. This isn't amateur work. Someone taught her these skills, or... He paused, remembering stories his Apache grandmother had whispered during his childhood, or she learned them the way children have always learned, by watching, by necessity, by becoming part of something larger than herself. A branch snapped 50 yards away, followed by muttered curses. The search team was closing in, their heavy boots and radio static announcing their presence to every creature within a mile. In the distance, a wolf howled, not the harmonious song they had heard earlier, but a warning cry that echoed off the mountain walls like an air raid siren. There. Sarah pointed to a flash of movement in the trees. She's watching us. The child stood partially hidden behind a massive pine, her small form almost invisible against the mottled bark. She was closer than before, close enough that Thomas could see the intelligence in her blue eyes, the way she held herself with the alert stillness of someone who had learned that survival depended on reading every nuance of her environment. Sarah slowly reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a granola bar, her movements deliberate and non-threatening. She placed it on a fallen log between them and the child, then stepped back. "We're not here to hurt you," she said softly, her voice carrying the gentle authority of 4 decades spent earning children's trust. The girl tilted her head, studying them with the same careful attention she had given the injured wolf. Then she raised both hands and made a series of gestures. Complex, flowing movements that spoke of linguistic sophistication far beyond what the media had assumed. "She's asking who we are," Sarah breathed, recognizing fragments from her Cherokee studies, "and whether we mean harm." Thomas slowly removed his wool cap, revealing his gray hair and the weathered features that carried traces of his own native heritage. He placed his right hand over his heart and spoke words his grandmother had taught him 60 years ago. She Thomas. Nietzsche. The effect was immediate and profound. The child's eyes widened, and she stepped fully into view, her bare feet silent on the frozen ground. She pointed to Thomas, then to herself, then made a gesture that needed no translation, the universal sign for family, for belonging, for recognition of shared blood. "She understands," Thomas whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "She knows." "Over here!" The sheriff's deputy's voice boomed through the forest, accompanied by the heavy breathing of men pushing through undergrowth. "I've got eyes on civilians in the target area." The spell shattered. The child's head snapped toward the approaching voices, her entire body tensing like a deer caught in headlights. But this was no helpless animal. This was a survivor who had learned to read danger in the tilt of a head, the cadence of a voice, the intent behind every movement. She looked once more at Thomas and Sarah, her expression conveying a message as clear as spoken words. "Choose your side." "Stay back," Thomas called to the approaching deputies, his command voice cutting through the forest with the authority of 3 decades in uniform. "You're scaring her!" Deputy Marcus Wheeler emerged from the tree line, his rifle held ready but not aimed, his young face flushed from exertion and cold. Behind him came Sergeant Mills, a 20-year veteran whose skeptical expression suggested he had seen enough to doubt everything. "Sir, ma'am, you need to step away from the child," Sergeant Mills commanded. "This is now a federal situation. Child Services is en route, and we have orders to secure the minor for her own safety." The child hadn't moved, but the forest around her had come alive. Shadows that might have been wolves flickered between the trees, and the very air seemed to vibrate with suppressed tension. The largest wolf, the silver-streaked matriarch Thomas had seen earlier, materialized from behind a cluster of birch trees, her amber eyes fixed on the armed men with the focused intensity of a predator calculating odds. "Easy, everyone," Thomas said, his voice calm but commanding. "Nobody moves fast. Nobody raises their voice. We're in her territory now." "Sir, that child has been living in subhuman conditions for God knows how long," Deputy Wheeler insisted. "She needs medical attention, proper food, psychological evaluation. We can't just leave her out here to—" The child moved. One moment she was standing by the tree. The next she was beside the fallen log where Sarah had left the granola bar. She picked it up, examined it carefully, then tore it open and began eating with the focused hunger of someone who had learned never to waste food. "She's malnourished," Sergeant Mills observed, his professional detachment wavering as he watched the small figure consume the bar in careful, measured bites. "Look at her clothes, her condition. This isn't a life, it's survival." Sarah stepped forward, her teacher's instincts overriding caution. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "can you tell us your name?" The child looked up from her meal, granola crumbs clinging to her lips. When she spoke, her voice was like wind through pine needles, soft, wild, and utterly heartbreaking. "Ayanna," she whispered. "Ayanna Crow Feather." The name hit Thomas like a physical blow. Crow Feather. He remembered the news reports from 4 years ago, the family that had vanished from their reservation home, the FBI investigation that had gone nowhere, the assumption that they had been victims of drug violence or domestic terrorism. The case had been closed, the family declared dead. "Jesus Christ," Sergeant Mills breathed. "The Crow Feather family." That was a federal case. The child, Ayanna, watched their reactions with the sharp intelligence of someone who had learned to read human emotions for survival. She made another gesture, this one unmistakably protective, and the silver wolf stepped closer, positioning herself between the armed men and the girl. "She's been alive all this time," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. 4 years old when her family disappeared. She's been surviving out here since she was a baby. Deputy Wheeler raised his radio. "Dispatch, this is Wheeler. We need federal notification. The subject appears to be Ayanna Crow Feather from the 2020 missing persons case. Repeat, we have found—" "Stop!" Thomas's command froze the deputy's finger on the radio button. "Before you make that call, before you bring in the FBI and the media circus and every authority figure who thinks they know what's best for a child they've never met, look at her." They all looked. Ayanna stood in the center of the clearing like a small queen holding court, flanked by her wolf guardian, her bright eyes moving from face to face, as if cataloging each person's soul. She showed no fear, no submission, no plea for rescue. She showed only the quiet dignity of someone who had found their place in the world and would defend it. "She's not a victim," Thomas continued. "She's a survivor, and she's about to lose the only family she has left." The radio crackled to life in Wheeler's hand. "All units, media vans spotted on Highway 2. ETA to your location, 30 minutes. Command wants this resolved before CNN arrives." Time was running out. Decisions made in the next few minutes would determine whether Ayanna Crow Feather returned to a world that had failed to protect her once already, or whether she would fight to stay in the wilderness that had become her salvation. The child looked directly at Thomas, her blue eyes holding depths that shouldn't exist in someone so young. Then she did something that changed everything. She smiled. The smile changed everything. In that moment, Ayanna Crow Feather transformed from tragic victim to something far more complex. A child who had not merely survived but adapted, who had found love in the wilderness and purpose in protecting her chosen family. The silver wolf beside her relaxed slightly, responding to some signal imperceptible to human eyes. "My name is Thomas," he said gently, crouching to bring himself closer to her eye level. "This is Sarah. We live nearby, and we've been watching over these mountains for many years." Ayana's head tilted in the gesture they had seen earlier, so similar to her wolf companions that it was impossible to tell who had learned it from whom. When she spoke again, her English was clearer, though accented with something that sounded like singing. "The mountain spirits told Aquila you would come," she said, pointing to the silver wolf. "They said the elder with warrior marks would understand the old ways." Sarah's breath caught. "Warrior marks?" Ayana gestured toward Thomas's hands, scarred from decades of outdoor work and military service, then touched her own face where 3 thin lines marked her left cheek. Deliberate scarification that spoke of cultural traditions maintained even in the wild. "She knows you're a veteran," Sarah whispered to Thomas. "Somehow she recognizes—" The radio crackled again. "Mills, what's your status? We've got federal marshals requesting immediate custody transfer." Sergeant Mills looked from his radio to the child, professional duty warring with something deeper. His own daughter was 8 years old, safe in her suburban bedroom with her stuffed animals and nightlight. This child had faced the Montana wilderness with nothing but her courage and a pack of wolves. 30 minutes, he said to Thomas. "That's all the time I can buy you before this becomes a federal circus." Deputy Wheeler started to protest, but Mills silenced him with a look. "Wheeler, establish a perimeter at the tree line. Nobody gets closer until I say so." Thomas felt the weight of impossible decisions settling on his shoulders. 30 minutes to convince a traumatized child to trust the same species that had destroyed her family. 30 minutes to bridge 4 years of survival instincts. 30 minutes to save her from a system that would see her wildness as damage to be repaired. "Ayana," Sarah said softly, "do you remember your family, your mother and father?" The child's expression grew distant, her eyes losing focus as she stared past them toward the mountains. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of memories too heavy for such small shoulders. "Mama sang to me in the old language. Papa taught me to read the signs in the sky, in the way birds fly. Little brother," her voice broke slightly, "little brother was too small. The bad men came with fire and noise. Papa told me to run to the sacred cave, to hide until the danger passed." Thomas's military training kicked in, his mind automatically analyzing tactical situations even as his heart broke for this child. "You've been waiting," he realized. "All this time, you've been waiting for your family to come back." Ayana nodded, tears freezing on her cheeks. "But Aquila found me first, when I was cold and hungry and the snow was too deep. She had lost her babies to the hunters with guns. We needed each other." The silver wolf, Aquila, moved closer, nuzzling against Ayana's side with maternal gentleness. The bond between them was so profound that it seemed to shimmer in the air like heat waves, a connection forged by mutual loss and sustained by unconditional love. "The men with radios want to take me away from her," Ayana continued, her child's clarity cutting through adult complexities. "They think she's dangerous, but she saved me. She taught me how to find food, how to stay warm, how to be brave when the storms come." Sarah knelt in the snow, her teacher's heart recognizing a pupil who had learned lessons no classroom could teach. "What would you like to happen, sweetheart, if you could choose anything in the world?" "I want to stay with my wolf family," Ayana said without hesitation. "But I also—" She looked at Thomas and Sarah with longing so naked it was painful to witness. "I also want to remember what it feels like to have human family again." The radio chatter grew more urgent. Mills, we have multiple news vans at the highway checkpoint. Federal Team ETA 15 minutes. Need immediate resolution. Thomas made a decision that would either save this child or destroy them all. Ayanna, what if there was a way to keep both families? What if Akila and her pack could live safely while you also learned to be part of the human world again? Her eyes brightened with desperate hope. Is that possible? I don't know, Thomas answered honestly, but I'd like to try. My home is large with lots of land. Sarah and we've been alone for a long time. We understand what it means to lose family. You would let Akila come too? Ayanna asked, her small hand buried in the wolf's thick fur. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. All of them. Your whole pack. For a moment, the clearing filled with possibility. The chance that love could triumph over bureaucracy, that family could be redefined by choice rather than law, that a child who had survived the impossible might be allowed to keep the family that had made survival possible. Then reality crashed back as Deputy Wheeler's voice cut through the morning air. Sergeant, we've got movement on the ridge. Looks like a full wolf pack, maybe 8 or 10 animals circling our position. Akila's ears pricked forward, and she let out a low call that was answered immediately by howls from the surrounding forest. The other wolves Ayanna had spoken of, Luna with her limp, the young males who served as scouts, the elderly alpha who had taught them all the old ways of hunting, they were all here, drawn by the scent of danger to their adopted human pup. They're protecting me, Ayanna explained matter-of-factly. They think the men with guns might hurt me. Sergeant Mills spoke rapidly into his radio. Command, we need to de-escalate immediately. The wolves are exhibiting defensive behavior. If we push this, someone's going to get hurt. Negative, Sergeant. Federal orders are to secure the child immediately. Use tranquilizers if necessary. Thomas saw the trap closing. In minutes, this sacred clearing would fill with officials who saw only a problem to be solved, a wild child to be civilized, a pack of wolves to be eliminated as threats to public safety. Everything beautiful and impossible about Ayanna's survival would be catalogued as trauma, her adaptation dismissed as psychological damage. There's another way, he said quietly, his mind racing through possibilities. But it means trusting me completely. Sarah gripped his arm. Thomas, what are you thinking? I'm thinking that sometimes the only way to save someone is to disappear with them long enough for the world to remember what really matters. He looked at Ayanna, whose intelligence blazed in her young face. Do you know the old trails through these mountains? The paths your ancestors used? She nodded eagerly. Akila taught me, the wolf roads that the two legs have forgotten. Then we run, Thomas said simply. All of us, together, until we can find a way to make this right. The howling grew closer, and through the trees, Thomas could see shapes moving with predatory grace. 6 wolves, just as Ayanna had said, positioning themselves like a military unit preparing to defend their territory. They had survived 4 years in these mountains by trusting their instincts and protecting each other. Now those same instincts were telling them that the humans with guns represented the greatest threat their family had ever faced. The sacred cave, Ayanna whispered urgently, the one Papa told me about. It's hidden where the bad men will never find it. Sarah looked at Thomas with the expression of someone standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that the only way forward was to jump. Are we really doing this? We're buying time, Thomas replied. Time for federal authorities to remember that this child is a human being, not a case file. Time for the media to tell the real story instead of sensationalizing a tragedy. Time for someone, somewhere, to figure out how to honor what she's survived instead of trying to fix what isn't broken. The radio erupted with urgent chatter as federal vehicles were spotted on the access road. In the distance, the mechanical whine of helicopter rotors began to cut through the mountain air. Ayana looked up at the adults who had promised to protect her, her blue eyes holding the accumulated wisdom of 4 years spent navigating between worlds. "Are you my family now, too?" "Yes," Sarah said without hesitation. "If you'll have us." The child's smile could have melted the snow around them. She turned to Akila and made a series of rapid gestures, speaking in a mixture of Apache and the wordless communication she had developed with her pack. The great wolf rose to her feet, muscles tensing for movement. "She says it's time to go home," Ayana translated, "to the place where all families are safe." The sacred cave that Ayana led them to defied every assumption Thomas had made about mountain geology. Hidden behind a waterfall that had frozen into crystalline curtains, the entrance was nearly invisible even when you knew where to look. Inside, the space opened into a cathedral of stone, with natural chambers carved by millennia of water and wind into rooms that seemed designed for habitation. "The ancestors built fires here for 1,000 winters," Ayana explained, her voice echoing off walls decorated with pictographs that predated European contact. "Papa said the spirits still keep it warm." Thomas ran his hand along symbols that told stories of hunts and families, of harsh winters survived and spring celebrated. His grandmother's blood recognized this place, whispered to him of reverence and sanctuary. Sarah knelt beside a fire ring constructed from stones worn smooth by countless hands, her teacher's mind cataloging the evidence of continuous human occupation. "She's been caring for this place," Sarah realized aloud. "Maintaining traditions she's too young to understand." Akila and her pack moved through the cave with the confidence of frequent visitors, each wolf seeking their preferred resting spot with the casual familiarity of coming home. The smallest wolf, Luna, Ayana called her, limped to a depression lined with pine boughs and collapsed with a sigh of relief that was purely human in its expression of gratitude. Outside, helicopter rotors thundered overhead, their mechanical violence a stark contrast to the ancient peace of the cave. Radio chatter echoed off the mountain walls as search teams coordinated their efforts, their voices growing increasingly frustrated as Thomas's trail disappeared into terrain too rough for vehicles. "Federal marshals are establishing a perimeter at the base of the mountain," Thomas reported, monitoring their communications on his handheld radio. "They're treating this like a kidnapping." "Aren't we?" Sarah asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Thomas looked at Ayana, who was carefully tending a small fire with the expertise of someone who had learned that warmth meant survival. The flames illuminated her face, revealing features that carried the delicate bone structure of her Apache heritage, alongside the determined set of her jaw that spoke of 4 years spent making life-or-death decisions daily. "We're protecting her," he said finally, "from people who think they know what's best for a child they've never taken time to understand." The radio crackled with a new voice, authoritative, cold, distinctly federal. "This is Agent Rebecca Martinez, FBI Child Recovery Unit. I'm ordering all civilian personnel to withdraw from the search area immediately. The subject is considered endangered and potentially hostile." "Hostile?" Sarah repeated, incredulous. She gestured toward Ayana, who was now braiding Luna's fur with the gentle attention of a mother preparing her child for bed. "That 6-year-old girl is hostile." "To their worldview, yes." Thomas adjusted the radio volume as Agent Martinez continued issuing orders that transformed a rescue into a siege. "She represents everything they can't control or categorize. A child who survived without their systems, who found family outside their definitions, who adapted instead of breaking." Ayana looked up from her task, her blue eyes reflecting firelight like a wild creature's. "The radio voice sounds angry," she observed, with the clarity children brought to adult complexities. "Why is she angry at me?" How do you explain institutionalized thinking to someone who had learned to communicate with wolves? How do you describe bureaucratic fear to a child who had faced mountain lions and survived blizzards? Thomas found himself searching for words that could bridge the gap between Ayana's reality and the world that waited beyond the cave. "She's not angry at you, little one," Sarah said gently. "She's afraid. When people don't understand something, they sometimes try to control it instead of learning from it." Like when the hunters first came to wolf territory, Ayana nodded sagely. They were afraid of Akila's pack, so they wanted to kill them all. "But Papa taught me that fear makes people do bad things to good spirits." The wisdom of it struck Thomas like a physical blow. This child, barely 6 years old, understood the psychology of prejudice better than most adults. She had lived it, survived it, and somehow emerged with her compassion intact. Outside the cave, the sounds of the search grew more organized and therefore more threatening. Dogs barked, bloodhounds brought in to follow scent trails. Heavy vehicles ground their way up mountain roads never designed for such traffic. The mechanical noise of a civilization that solved problems through overwhelming force filled the natural silence that Ayana called home. "They're getting closer," Thomas reported, watching the cave entrance where frozen waterfalls created a natural barrier that wouldn't stop determined pursuers for long. Akila raised her great head, amber eyes alert to dangers her human companions couldn't yet perceive. A low growl rumbled in her throat, not aggressive but warning. The other wolves stirred, their pack instincts responding to their matriarch's unease. "She smells the dogs," Ayana translated unnecessarily. The tension in the cave had become palpable, a living thing that connected human and wolf hearts with shared understanding of impending threat. Sarah moved closer to the fire, her practical mind already calculating their dwindling options. "How long can we stay here?" "Not long enough," Thomas admitted. "They'll find us eventually. Dogs don't care about hidden entrances or ancestral sanctuaries." "Then we fight," Ayana said with the matter-of-fact tone children use to discuss games or chores. "Akila's pack fought the bad hunters. I can fight too." The casual way she spoke of violence, not seeking it but accepting it as inevitable, revealed how completely the wilderness had shaped her worldview. She had learned that some things were worth defending with your life, that family meant everything, that sometimes the only choice was between fighting and dying. "No fighting," Thomas said firmly, his command voice cutting through the cave's echo. "We're not warriors today, Ayana. We're teachers." She tilted her head in that wolfish gesture of curiosity. "What are we teaching?" "That there are different ways to be human," Sarah answered, understanding Thomas's strategy. "That family doesn't always look the way people expect, that love can survive in places where other emotions fail." The radio erupted with coordinated chatter as search teams converged on their approximate location. Agent Martinez's voice cut through the static with clinical efficiency. "Heat signatures detected in Grid 77, possible cave system. Deploy tactical team for extraction." "Tactical team," Thomas repeated grimly. He had served on similar units during his military career, knew the mentality that reduced complex human situations to problems requiring overwhelming force to solve. "They're treating a lost child like an enemy combatant." Ayana stood suddenly, her small body radiating the same alertness as the wolves around her. "They're here," she whispered. She was right. The sound of boots on stone echoed from the cave entrance, accompanied by the harsh beam of tactical flashlights cutting through the natural twilight of their sanctuary. Voices called out with the aggressive authority of people accustomed to immediate compliance. "Federal agents, exit the cave with your hands visible. The child is to be surrendered immediately for her own safety." Thomas looked at Sarah, seeing his own desperate calculation reflected in her eyes. They had perhaps 30 seconds before armed agents entered the cave, before Ayana's story became another case study in failed systems and bureaucratic solutions to human problems. "There's another way out," Ayana said quietly, pointing toward the back of the cave where shadows suggested deeper passages. "The old way, the way the ancestors used when enemies came to the sacred places." "How do you know?" Sarah asked. Ayana's smile held mysteries older than her years. "Because this is where they taught me to hide when Papa couldn't come back. Because the mountain spirits still protect the children of the people. Because sometimes the only way forward is the way that leads deeper into the heart of who you really are." The footsteps grew louder, and the tactical lights began to penetrate the main chamber. In moments they would be discovered, and everything beautiful about Ayana's survival would be reduced to headlines and policy discussions. Thomas made the choice that would define the rest of their lives. He followed the child who had learned wisdom from wolves, trusting that sometimes the ancient paths were the only ones that led to truth. Behind them, Akila and her pack melted into the darkness like spirits returning to the world that had birthed them, following the human who had become their heart into passages that led not just deeper into the mountain but deeper into the mystery of what it meant to be truly alive. The deeper passages of the cave system led them through a labyrinth that seemed to exist outside of time itself. Ayana moved with the confidence of someone who had traveled these routes countless times, her small hand trailing along rock walls carved with symbols that predated any written history Thomas knew. Behind them, the shouts of federal agents grew fainter, then disappeared entirely as the ancient pathways swallowed sound and light alike. "Where does this lead?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the soft padding of wolf paws on stone. "To the Heart Place," Ayana replied, her words carrying the weight of inherited knowledge. "Where the old ones went when the world above became too dangerous for the people." They walked in single file through passages so narrow that Thomas had to turn sideways in places, following the child who navigated by touch and instinct through corridors that had sheltered her ancestors for generations. The wolves moved like liquid shadows, their superior night vision making them ghostly guides in the underground darkness. After what felt like hours, but could have been minutes, they emerged into a vast underground chamber that took Thomas's breath away. Natural light filtered down through cracks in the mountain above, illuminating a space that had been transformed by human hands into something approaching a cathedral. Stone shelves held pottery and tools, their surfaces worn smooth by countless fingers. Fire rings marked with careful precision showed where generations had gathered for warmth and ceremony. "My God," Sarah breathed, her teacher's mind recognizing the significance of what they had stumbled into. "This is an archaeological treasure, a complete record of indigenous mountain culture spanning centuries." Ayana settled beside one of the fire rings with the easy familiarity of someone coming home. "Papa brought me here once, when I was very small. He said this was where our people came to remember who they were when the outside world tried to make them forget." Thomas knelt beside ancient grinding stones, his fingers tracing patterns carved with loving precision by artisans whose names were lost to history. His grandmother's blood stirred in recognition of symbols that spoke of seasons and hunting, of birth and death, of the eternal cycle that connected all living things. Akila chose that moment to collapse. The great silver wolf had been struggling for the last hour of their underground journey. Her breathing labored, her steps increasingly unsteady. Now she lay on her side in the center of the chamber, her amber eyes dulled with pain that she had been hiding to protect her pack. "Akila!" Ayana cried, rushing to the wolf's side. Her small hands moved over the animal's fur with the expertise of someone who had learned to read injury and illness through touch. "She's burning with fever." Thomas knelt beside them, his military medical training automatically assessing the situation. The wolf's breathing was rapid and shallow, her gums pale, her body radiating heat that spoke of serious infection. "When did this start?" "3 days ago," Ayana admitted, tears streaming down her face. "She stepped in one of the bad traps the hunters left. I cleaned it the way Papa taught me. But—" Her voice broke as she confronted the limits of wilderness medicine against modern injury. Sarah examined the wound hidden beneath matted fur on Akila's rear leg, a deep laceration that had become severely infected despite Ayana's careful attention. "She needs antibiotics," Sarah said gently. "Real medicine, the kind only humans can provide." The irony was devastating. Akila, the wolf who had saved a human child and created an impossible family, was dying because she couldn't access the medical care that the human world demanded she didn't deserve. The federal agents hunting them above could save her life if they could be convinced to see her as more than a wild animal to be eliminated. "The radio voices," Ayana said suddenly, her child's mind making connections with startling clarity. "They want to help me be healthy. Could they help Akila be healthy too?" Thomas looked at the dying wolf, at the child whose entire world was centered around protecting her pack, at Sarah whose maternal instincts had fully awakened for the first time in 65 years. The choice was impossible: surrender to authorities who might separate them forever, or watch the heart of their family die in the darkness. "There might be a way," he said slowly, his mind working through possibilities that required more courage than tactical skill. "But it means taking the biggest risk of our lives." Above them, the sounds of the search had changed. Instead of aggressive pursuit, Thomas could hear the measured voices of people setting up camp, establishing a perimeter, settling in for a siege. Agent Martinez's voice drifted down through the stone cracks with clinical patience. "We know you're down there. The thermal imaging shows multiple heat signatures in the cave system. You have 1 hour to bring the child out voluntarily before we deploy gas to force evacuation." "Gas," Sarah repeated, understanding the threat immediately. "They'll flood the caves with tear gas or worse, force us out like insects being fumigated." Ayana looked up from where she cradled Akila's great head in her lap, her blue eyes blazing with the fierce protectiveness that had kept her alive for 4 years. "They want to hurt my family to save me, but I don't want to be saved if it means everyone I love dies." The wisdom of children, Thomas thought. Too young to understand political complexity, too honest to accept adult rationalizations, too pure to believe that love should ever require such terrible choices. Luna, the small wolf who had been injured when they first encountered the pack, limped over to where Akila lay dying. She touched her nose to the alpha's muzzle in a gesture of farewell, so heartbreakingly human that Sarah began to weep openly. The other wolves followed, each paying their respects to the matriarch who had led them through 4 years of survival and love. "She saved me when I had nothing," Ayana whispered, her small hands stroking Akila's fur with infinite gentleness. "She taught me that family means never letting anyone face the dark alone. She made me brave when I was too scared to keep living." Thomas felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. The same sensation he had experienced when holding his son Michael for the first time, when watching his wife Ruth fight cancer with dignity and grace, when receiving word that his military unit had been saved by the sacrifice of a single soldier. The moment when you realize that some things are worth any sacrifice, that love creates obligations that transcend self-preservation. "Then we honor what she taught you," he said firmly. "We show the world above us that families protect each other, even when, especially when, that protection requires courage beyond what seems possible." Sarah wiped her tears and looked up through the stone ceiling toward the voices of people who saw only problems to be solved rather than relationships to be honored. What are you proposing, Thomas? I'm proposing we go up there and teach them what Ayana has been trying to show us all along, he replied. That there are different ways to be human. That love creates family regardless of species or circumstance. That sometimes the most broken people find healing in the most unexpected places. Ayana looked at him with eyes that held far too much knowledge for someone who should still be learning to tie her shoes. And if they don't listen? If they try to take me away from everyone I love? Thomas smiled with the grim confidence of a man who had spent his life serving something larger than himself. Then we make them understand that this family fights together, all of us, to the end. Above them, Agent Martinez's voice echoed down with bureaucratic finality. 45 minutes remaining. After that, we extract the child by any means necessary. Akila's breathing grew more labored, each breath a struggle that might be her last. Time was running out for all of them. The dying wolf, the federal siege above, the little girl who had somehow created a family from the broken pieces of tragedy and abandonment. "Help me get her ready to travel," Thomas said, making the decision that would either save them all or destroy everything beautiful they had found in each other. If we're going to face the world, we face it together. In the ancient chamber, where generations of indigenous people had gathered to remember their true selves, 3 humans and 5 wolves prepared to climb toward a confrontation that would determine whether love could survive the collision with a world that had forgotten how to recognize it. They emerged from the cave system like figures from a legend, backlit by the dying light of a Montana sunset that painted the mountain peaks in shades of fire and blood. Thomas carried the dying Akila in his arms, the great wolf's breathing so shallow that each exhale might be her last. Sarah supported Ayana, whose small face was streaked with tears, but set with the determination of someone who had learned that love sometimes demanded impossible courage. The remaining wolves flanked them like an honor guard, their amber eyes reflecting the tactical lights that immediately blazed to life around the clearing. "Nobody move!" Agent Martinez's voice cut through the twilight with the authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. "Weapons down. Hands visible." But Thomas Whitehorse had spent 3 decades in uniform, had led men through combat zones where split-second decisions meant the difference between coming home and being carried home, and he understood the psychology of armed standoffs better than most. Instead of dropping to his knees in submission, he continued walking forward with the measured pace of a man who had nothing left to lose and everything worth protecting. "Agent Martinez," he called out, his command voice carrying across the clearing with undeniable authority. "I'm a veteran of the United States Army, 28 years of service, and I'm asking you to stand down your weapons before someone gets hurt unnecessarily." The federal agent stepped into the circle of light, her tactical gear and drawn pistol making her appear more like a soldier than a child welfare specialist. She was younger than Thomas had expected, probably in her 30s, with the kind of professional composure that came from years of difficult extractions and bureaucratic pressures. "Sir, you are interfering with the federal investigation and endangering a minor," Martinez replied, though Thomas noticed her weapon remained lowered. "That child has been living in subhuman conditions and requires immediate medical attention." "You're absolutely right," Thomas agreed, surprising everyone present. "She does need medical attention. We all do. This wolf is dying from an infected wound, and the little girl who has been caring for her is heartbroken. What she needs is compassion, not criminalization." Ayana stepped forward, her small hand still clutching Sarah's, but her voice carrying clearly across the clearing. "My name is Ayana Crow Feather," she announced with the dignity of someone far older than her 6 years. "I am the last daughter of the mountain people, and these are my families, my wolf family and my human family. We have come to ask for your help." The simple honesty of her words created a moment of silence that stretched across the armed perimeter like a held breath. Federal agents trained for resistance and hostility found themselves confronting a child who spoke with the clarity of someone who had learned that truth was the only weapon worth wielding. Agent Martinez holstered her sidearm, though she remained alert for any sign of threat. "Ayanna, we've been looking for you for 4 years. Your family, your human family, was murdered, and everyone assumed you had been killed too. Do you understand how many people have been searching for you?" "I understand that bad men killed my mama and papa and little brother," Ayanna replied, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "I understand that I would have died too if Akila hadn't found me and taught me how to survive. I understand that love doesn't always look the way people expect it to look." Sarah moved closer to the federal agent, her teacher's instincts recognizing another woman struggling with impossible choices between duty and compassion. "Agent Martinez, I've spent 40 years working with traumatized children. What you're seeing isn't damage. It's adaptation. It's resilience. It's a little girl who found a way to create family from abandonment and love from loss. She's been living with wolves," Martinez said, though her tone had shifted from authoritative to uncertain. "Eating raw meat, sleeping in caves with no education, no medical care, no foster homes that would have failed her," Thomas interrupted, his voice carrying the weight of statistics they all knew too well. "No institutional care that treats symptoms instead of addressing trauma. No system that would have separated her from the only stability she's known since her family was murdered." Martinez looked around the clearing, taking in the scene with professional assessment. The wolves maintained their protective formation but showed no aggression, responding to some signal from Ayanna that spoke of training and mutual respect rather than wild predation. Thomas and Sarah stood with the bearing of people who had chosen their position deliberately, not fugitives fleeing justice, but advocates protecting something precious. "The wolf needs veterinary care," Martinez observed, her training helping her recognize the severity of Akila's condition. "Critical care, probably surgery. That's not something we can provide in the field. But you can provide transport to someone who can," Thomas said, sensing the opening he had been hoping for. "You can choose to see this as a rescue operation instead of a law enforcement action. I can't just ignore federal protocols. You can exercise discretion," Sarah interrupted, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades navigating bureaucratic systems to help children. "You can recognize that this situation requires wisdom, not just policy compliance." Ayanna knelt beside Akila, her small hands stroking the dying wolf's fur with infinite gentleness. When she looked up, her blue eyes held the accumulated wisdom of 4 years spent making life and death decisions daily. "She saved me," she said simply. "When everyone thought I was dead, when the whole world gave up looking for me, she found me and made me her daughter. She taught me that families protect each other no matter what. That love means never letting anyone face the dark alone." The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything the adults present thought they understood about appropriate relationships, about civilization, about the boundaries between human and animal love. Around the clearing, federal agents who had children of their own began lowering their weapons, responding to something in the scene that transcended their training. Martinez spoke into her radio, her voice careful and measured. "Command, this is Martinez. Situation is stable. Request immediate veterinary medical transport for injured animal. Also request child welfare specialist and Native American cultural liaison before proceeding with custody arrangements." "Negative, Martinez. Orders are for immediate extraction. The child is to be transferred to federal protective custody within the hour." Thomas saw the moment when Agent Martinez made the choice that would define her career and possibly her life. She switched off her radio and looked directly at Ayanna, speaking to the child rather than about her. "What do you want to happen, sweetheart?" if you could choose anything in the world? Ayana's answer came without hesitation, carrying the clarity of someone who had learned to distinguish between wants and needs during 4 years of survival. I want Akila to live. I want my wolf family to be safe. I want Thomas and Sarah to be my human family. And I want the world to understand that love makes us all stronger, not weaker. The federal agent looked around the clearing at her subordinates, at the dying wolf, at the child who had somehow created family from the wreckage of tragedy. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of someone choosing conscience over career advancement. All units, establish medical perimeter. We're treating this as a medical emergency, not an extraction. The child remains with her current guardians pending full cultural and psychological evaluation. The radio exploded with protests from command, but Martinez removed her earpiece and dropped it in the snow. Sometimes, she said to Thomas, you have to choose between following orders and doing what's right. Today, I'm choosing what's right. As emergency medical helicopters thundered overhead, bringing veterinary specialists who would fight to save Akila's life, Ayana looked up at the adults who had risked everything to protect her chosen family. Her smile could have melted the Montana snow, carrying within it the promise that love, given the chance to flourish, could indeed overcome any obstacle the world might place in its path. But the radio chatter from the helicopters brought news that would test that love beyond anything they had yet faced. FBI command reports positive identification on the Crow Feather case. We have suspects in custody. Requesting immediate transport of witness for federal testimony. 6 months later, snow was falling again on the Montana mountains, but this time it carried the promise of renewal rather than the threat of death. Thomas stood at his kitchen window, the same window where he had first seen the viral video that changed everything, watching Ayana teach Luna and the other wolves to navigate the elaborate obstacle course they had built together in the expanded yard. The little girl who had once survived by adapting to wolf pack dynamics now moved between two worlds with the fluid grace of someone who had learned that identity didn't require choosing sides. She wore jeans and a warm jacket that Sarah had bought for her, but around her neck hung the traditional Apache beadwork that connected her to ancestors whose blood still sang in her veins. "She's teaching them English," Sarah observed, joining Thomas with 2 cups of coffee. Her voice carried the wonder of someone who continued to discover new depths in the child they had officially adopted 3 months earlier. Through the window, they could see Ayana patiently working with Luna, the smallest wolf, using a combination of hand signals, Apache words, and gentle English commands. The wolf's responses weren't quite language, but they weren't purely animal behavior either. Something new was emerging from their relationship, a form of interspecies communication that had captured the attention of animal behaviorists worldwide. "The university researchers want to study her again," Thomas mentioned, not quite able to keep the protective edge from his voice. The first wave of scientific interest had been overwhelming. Psychologists wanting to document her feral period, linguists fascinated by her trilingual abilities, anthropologists eager to understand how traditional Apache knowledge had been preserved and transmitted in the wilderness. "And what did you tell them?" Sarah asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "I told them that Ayana Crow Feather Whitehorse is a 6-year-old girl, not a laboratory specimen. If she wants to share her story when she's older, that will be her choice to make." The adoption had been unprecedented in family court history, not just the legal recognition of Thomas and Sarah as Ayana's parents, but the establishment of legal guardian status for the wolf pack that had originally saved her life. Agent Martinez, who had resigned from federal service to become a child advocacy lawyer, had argued successfully that separating Ayana from her first family would constitute cultural and psychological violence equivalent to destroying sacred burial grounds. Akila padded into view, her silver fur gleaming in the winter light. The infection that had nearly killed her in the cave had left her with a slight limp, but the veterinary team that Agent Martinez had summoned had worked miracles. More importantly, the great wolf had regained her role as pack matriarch, while gracefully accepting Thomas and Sarah as co-leaders of their extended family unit. "The reporters want another interview," Sarah mentioned, gesturing toward a stack of requests that had been growing steadily since 60 Minutes aired their segment about the Wolf Girl's real story. National Geographic, Discovery Channel, even some Hollywood producers interested in making a movie. Thomas shook his head. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. The world has enough entertainment. What it needs is time to understand what actually happened here." What had actually happened defied easy categorization. The FBI investigation that followed their emergence from the caves had uncovered a conspiracy that reached far beyond a simple family murder. Palmer Mining Corporation's illegal activities on sacred Apache land had been part of a systematic pattern of violence against indigenous families who refused to sell mineral rights. Marcus Webb, the private investigator who had been tracking Ayanna, turned out to be the son of Palmer Mining's head of security, a man whose guilt over his father's crimes had driven him to addiction and desperation. But Marcus had also been the key to unraveling the entire conspiracy. His testimony, combined with evidence he had been secretly gathering for months, had led to federal indictments that dismantled one of the largest corporate criminal enterprises in Western history. The irony was profound. The man hunting Ayanna had become instrumental in delivering justice for her family's murder. "He wrote again," Sarah said quietly, pulling a letter from her pocket. Marcus Webb, now serving a reduced sentence in federal prison, had been writing to them regularly, not asking for forgiveness, which he considered unearnable, but sharing information about other missing indigenous children whose cases might be connected to Palmer Mining's activities. Thomas took the letter but didn't open it immediately. Webb's redemption journey was real and important, but it remained secondary to the daily miracle of watching Ayanna bloom in the safety of unconditional love. The child who had once eaten raw fish with wolves now helped Sarah bake cookies for the elementary school fundraiser, but she also maintained her role as pack leader with responsibilities that extended far beyond typical childhood concerns. Outside, Ayanna had finished her training session and was now simply playing, throwing snowballs that the wolves caught with enthusiastic leaps, laughing with the pure joy of someone who had learned that happiness was possible even after surviving the unthinkable. Her laughter carried on the mountain wind like music, a sound that Thomas had never expected to hear in his home again. "Joseph Standing Bear called," Sarah mentioned, referring to the Apache elder who had served as cultural consultant during Ayanna's custody proceedings. "The tribal council wants to formally recognize her as a bridge between worlds, someone who carries traditional knowledge into the modern age, while helping non-native people understand what we can learn from indigenous wisdom." The recognition was both honor and burden. At 6 years old, Ayanna was already being positioned as a symbol of survival and adaptation, a living example of how love could transcend the boundaries that humans created between themselves and the natural world. Thomas worried about the weight of such expectations on someone who should be focused on learning to read and making friends at school. "What does she want?" he asked, because that question had become central to every decision they made as a family. "She wants to help other lost children find their families," Sarah replied, her voice soft with the pride of someone watching their child grow into their best possible self. She asked if there were other kids living alone in the mountains, other wolf packs who might need human friends, other families torn apart by bad people who needed someone to help put the pieces back together. The scope of Ayanna's vision was breathtaking. She wasn't content to simply survive her own trauma, she wanted to transform it into healing for others. At an age when most children were learning to tie their shoes, She was already thinking about how to use her unique experience to address systemic problems that had destroyed countless families like her own. A knock at the door interrupted Thomas's thoughts. Agent Martinez stood on their porch, no longer in federal tactical gear, but dressed in the casual clothes of someone who had found a new purpose in life. She had become a regular visitor, drawn back repeatedly to witness the ongoing miracle of Ayanna's adjustment to dual-world living. "How's our girl doing?" Martinez asked as Sarah let her in, her former law enforcement authority replaced by the gentler confidence of someone who had learned to measure success in terms of children's smiles rather than case closure statistics. "See for yourself," Thomas suggested, pointing toward the window where Ayanna was now building a snow fort with architectural precision that suggested both her Apache heritage's relationship to natural construction and her wolves' instinctive understanding of defensive positioning. Martinez watched for several minutes, her expression cycling through amazement, professional curiosity, and something deeper, the recognition that she was witnessing something unprecedented in her experience. "The child psychology expert still can't explain how she's so well adjusted," she observed. "By every metric they understand, she should be struggling with attachment disorders, communication difficulties, integration problems." "Maybe their metrics don't account for love," Sarah suggested simply. "Maybe trauma isn't just something that happens to you, but also something you can transform through the choices you make about how to respond to it." Outside, Ayanna had finished her snow fort and was now inviting each wolf inside to inspect her work. The sight of the small girl hosting a formal review of her architectural achievement by 5 wolves, who took the inspection seriously enough to sniff every corner and offer approval through tail wags, was so absurd and wonderful that all 3 adults began laughing. "She's going to change the world," Martinez said with the certainty of someone who had seen enough broken systems to recognize genuine innovation when it appeared. "She already has," Thomas replied, watching his daughter, biological connection irrelevant in the face of chosen love, demonstrate to a pack of wolves that humans could be trusted with their most precious concerns. As the afternoon light began to fade over the Montana mountains, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of gold and rose, Ayanna looked toward the house and saw her family watching her through the kitchen window. Her wave was pure joy, the gesture of someone who had learned that love multiplied rather than divided when it was shared freely. In that moment, Thomas Whitehorse understood that they had all been rescued. Not just Ayanna from the wilderness, not just the wolves from a hostile world, but himself and Sarah from the loneliness that had nearly consumed them before this impossible child had shown them that family was something you built rather than something you were born into. The greatest families aren't always born. Sometimes they're chosen, built from the wreckage of broken dreams and impossible circumstances. Thomas and Sarah thought their chance at parenthood had passed, that empty bedrooms and silent dinners were their destiny. But love has a way of arriving when we least expect it, in forms we never imagined possible. A 6-year-old girl who survived the unthinkable, raised by wolves who taught her that family means never facing the darkness alone, showed them that it's never too late to become the parent your heart always dreamed of being. Their story reminds us that the families we create through choice, compassion, and courage often run deeper than blood. Whether you've lost children, never had them, or feel disconnected from the ones you raised, remember that your capacity to love and nurture doesn't have an expiration date. Every day brings new opportunities to become someone's chosen family, through mentorship, volunteering, or simply opening your heart to unexpected connections. Your greatest chapter of love and purpose might still be waiting to be written. Share your thoughts. Have you ever found family in unexpected places? What's one way you could open your heart to creating new connections today? Leave a comment below. Your story might inspire someone else to believe in second chances.